Hi, I'm Chef Lynn and welcome to the Flavor Secrets Kitchen. Today's lesson is all about braising. Braising is a fancy name for cooking a very tough cut of meat very slowly in a little bit of liquid for a long time. It's great because the meat has time to tenderize and it has time to absorb the flavors of the other wonderful things that you put in the pot. Here are a couple of examples of braising pots for you to take a look at. This one is round and it's called a Dutch oven. All you really care about is that it's a nice heavy pot so that whatever you put inside won't burn. The heaviness of the pot will insulate the meat. So this is a Dutch oven. This is a French one, and you can notice that it's shaped like an oval instead of round, and it's called a Doufeu. You can see that it's printed right on here, D-O-U-F-E-U, pardon my pronunciation, but it's exactly the same idea. Both of these pots are made of iron. It's just that this one is covered with enamel. They're both heavy and both will work just as well. Okay, the dish that we're making today is called Osso Bucco. Osso Bucco is Italian for hole in the bone. And as you can see, I've got a beautiful shank here. This happens to be a beef shank, but the dish is traditionally made with veal or calf. Beef happened to be what my butcher had today, so we're using beef. It really doesn't make any difference. All right, now you can see here that I have a piece of kitchen twine cut off. I just took it off this ball right here. You need maybe about a yard of it. And I'm going to wrap around this shank a couple of times and then tie it off. Not real tight because I don't want it to explode when it cooks. I just want to hold it together. That's the whole purpose of this. This meat is going to get really, really tender, and I want it to look round and nice when I put it on the plate. So if I tie it like this during cooking, I don't have to worry about it falling apart. And at the end, I'll be able to lift it out with a spatula and set it on the plate, and it will look just like that. Okay, so let's put it over here on the dish and bring it over. The first thing we have to do is to sear our meat. This is also a cast iron frying pan, so you'll notice that this is a continuous part of the handle is a continuous part of the frying pan here. So I've got a rubber piece that I'll slip right on the end, and the reason for that is so that it goes on there a little bit hard. The reason for that is so I can grab it during cooking and I don't have to worry about burning my hand. Okay, to get a good sear on this meat, you need two things. First of all, you need a really hot pan. The second thing is you need to make sure not to crowd the pan. If you put too much meat in, it will release its juice, and then what you'll get is a boiling, and you won't get the browning effect that you'll get if you have a nice hot surface. I also have taken a paper towel and just patted these a little bit to make sure that they're dry. Okay, now how can I tell whether or not the frying pan is hot enough? You can see that I started this out on very high heat. This is just plain old tap water. If I take a little bit of tap water, dip my fingers in it, pat them off, and just go like this, if I don't hear a sizzling sound, then the pan isn't hot enough. So that means that we need to wait just a second until this heats up. It won't take very long, and I can just keep trying that. See, I still don't hear anything, so let's wait just another minute. Probably takes about 60 seconds for the pan to heat up. And as soon as it's hot, there, I can start to hear it just a little bit, but I want to make sure it's rip-roaring hot. I don't want to just hear this sound. I want the water to actually bead up and disappear. Can you see how it's going away and disappearing? It might be hard for you to hear, but now the pot is hot enough. So I'll turn the heat down just for a second and add some oil and then turn it right back up. The reason I turned the heat down was because if I spilled a little bit of grease onto the burner or into the flame, it would flare up and you have the potential of hurting yourself. So I turned the heat down just enough. I put in just enough olive oil here to cover the bottom of the pan. Why olive oil? Because olive oil has a smoke point that's 100 degrees higher than butter. If I use butter or something like that, I'm likely to burn the meat or burn the butter, and then it will make the meat not taste good. Okay, so I want to get a real hot Hear that sizzle? And when you put this on into the frying pan, here's a trick that will keep it from sticking. If you slide it, it will never stick. Okay, now hear that sizzling? My suggestion is that you only do one of these at a time, because these are so big. If you use veal, you can probably do a couple of them at a time. Don't be afraid to just let your meat sit there and get brown. It's going to take a few minutes. Okay, and I want to wait until this meat is really crusty. Actually, this oil is hot enough that I can probably do more than one. But again, I'm moving this around. You could probably put all three in here because I've already patted these up and they're pretty dry. So in the interest of time here, we'll go ahead and do that. You don't hurt anything by checking to see, by lifting it up and checking to see if they're brown enough, but don't be afraid to just let them sit there. The more you move them around, the more you stir in a pan, the cooler it'll get and the longer it'll take, because every time you do that, you'll cool it down. Okay, so we're just going to let these sit there and get really crusty. This was the first one we put in there, so I'll check that one. Yeah, I'm getting a real nice sear on the bottom. You see how this is already starting to puff up? That's the reason, and come out of the string, that's the reason that I didn't want to tie it very tightly. Okay, this one is about ready. So I'm just going to turn that over. Oh, your string might pop off just a little bit like that. That's no problem. After it cools down, you can pull it back down. This does take a few minutes. There, see how it's getting nice and brown? Unfortunately, we just have to wait until they get really brown, because I want you to see how brown they should get. Okay, here's one. Let them start even to get, as I said, crusty. As I mentioned, Osso Bucco is always made from a slice of the calf. And I mean calf in the sense that calf is a piece of the leg, okay? Not calf as in veal. So this is actually a piece of the leg bone. And what makes this dish special is the marrow that's inside this bone. It's really a wonderful delicacy that's totally delicious. Okay, there we're starting to get some crust on that one. While we're waiting for that, I'll just get this out of the way. Here, I'll set it over here. And there, we've got some nice browning on that one. And now on this one. And now on this one. Okay, so I'll let that sit there just for another minute so that the other side will also get crusty brown. And then what I'd like to do is just move these out of the way. From this caramelization or this browning of the meat, there's lots of good flavor left in this pan. And I want to capture that flavor. And the way I'll do that is to add a few things in here that will cause all that flavor to come up off the pan and come inside my dish. In iron pans, you should use a wooden spatula or a heat-proof spatula, because if you use metal inside a pan like this, it'll start to pit and turn gray. So it's a good idea to use something that's a little softer. Hear that noise? That means sauté. And sauté is French for to jump. That means I'm hearing it sauté is what I should have said. Okay, these onions are almost immediately starting to turn brown. And as you can see, the little bits of meat that were left in the pan are starting to release. I've still got my flame on high, and I've still got plenty of oil. I didn't have to add any oil at all. Now those can sit there for just a second and continue to brown. And while they're browning, I'm going to open up some tomato paste here. I didn't open this up ahead of time because I wanted to show you this nifty can opener. You put it on sort of left-handed and then turn it around just like a regular can opener. But what's happening here is this can opener is cutting it on the side instead of the top. So it's really cool because what you end up with is something that has no sharp edge. It's great to use if you have kids, for example. I have a sister who always used to cut her finger on these things, so I got her one of these. All right, so this is tomato paste, and it's the next really traditional thing that we'll add to the Osso Bucco. We've got our onions here, and we want to heat this tomato paste a little bit because that sweetens it. I want to have about 3 tablespoons. So I don't have a tablespoon here, that's why I'm filling it a little bit full. And then I want to distribute that among the onions. If you just take your tomato paste and put it directly into the pot, it'll stay in a lump like this. And I want it to go all through the dish. So what I'm doing here is just stirring it through. Okay, now I can turn my heat down a little bit because the next ingredient that I'll add has a tendency to burn. Okay, so I've got my tomato paste now distributed. I'm being a kind of a wild stirrer here and throwing my onions out all over the place. Okay, so the tomato paste, is distributed all through the onions. And the next thing I'm adding is about 3 tablespoons of cake flour. And I want to use the heat to blend the cake flour in with the tomato sauce. And at this point I'm going to turn my flame completely off because I absolutely do not want this cake flour to burn. Why cake flour? Cake flour, first of all, comes in a box, not a bag. You can find it in pretty much any grocery store or market nowadays. The reason we use cake flour for making gravies, and that's the purpose of it here, is because it has the highest starch content. Therefore, it'll make the creamiest gravy. That starch content will gelatinize and make it really nice and smooth and creamy, and we won't have to do anything to it. Next, our pan is still real hot, and I'm putting in a cup of red wine. And at this point, I want to stir quite a bit so that all the good flavors that we've left in the pan will release into the liquid. Okay, you can see why it's really important that you're able to pick up the handle of your pan, because the next thing we want to do is move this liquid into our Dutch oven. Oh, this smells so good. The wine that I used, look at what a rich color it made this, it's gorgeous. The wine that I used is a very hearty Spanish wine that's made in the style of the southern Rhone region. It's one that I like the taste of very much, and it only costs about $10. So I don't feel like you have to use a very expensive cooking wine, but you should use one that tastes good. Don't just use junky old wine that nobody wants to drink, because believe me, it will flavor your dish. Okay, this is even just a little bit hot, even with this handle on it. So I'll grab a dish towel here and move all of this wonderful beginnings of a sauce over into the Dutch oven. I'll scrape out as much of it as I can get because it's all really wonderful flavor. Now you want to let that pan cool a little bit before you put water in it to clean it. So we'll just put it over here where it can cool off. Next, we put in some vegetables that I've already prepared down here. I've got a couple of different kinds of onions. One way you can build flavor in sauces and dishes is to use different kinds of the same thing. For example, you could choose shallots here, you could choose leek here, or you could choose a number of different kinds of onions. here I've chosen some cipollini onions. They always look like this. They're sort of flat and they have a high residual sugar content, so they're really sweet. And they taste really great with braising dishes. What I will do at the end is take a complete onion out and give it to each person. I've also chosen some pearl onions just because they're pretty. And all I've done, you can see, is I've cut just a very thin slice off of the core here, and I've peeled the brown skin away from the onion. That's all. So the next thing I'll do is I'll sort of push this. Here, I'll bring this over here so you can see it. I'll just sort of push this around so that it covers the bottom, and then I'll set my meat on top of it. I'll put 2 pieces of meat in, and then I'll set these onions in, just tucking it around the meat. This is a heavy pot, and I set it on a hot burner, not too smart on my part. Here we go. So I'm just going to tuck these onions in around the meat, and then I'll put in some of my vegetables. Here I've got the perfect vegetables for creating a really delicious sauce. In addition to the onion, in most sauces you'll find carrot and celery. So I'll put those in, some underneath, tucking them underneath the meat, and some on the sides. And then this is something that isn't traditional to Osso Bucco, but it's something that I like to add. These are just sliced peppers, sliced bell peppers, and I chose 3 colors because it gives an element of color to the dish, which makes it more attractive. So now I'll put the peppers in and kind of push them down, and then bring this last piece of meat over. I want some of those peppers to go underneath. So I'll just lift the meat up a little bit and get some of that to fall down. Okay. The next element is some chicken broth. Now we're making a beef dish, and it's another way that I add an extra element of flavor. Instead of using beef broth, which you also could use, I've decided to use chicken broth. And I'll pour the chicken broth in. It'll take about 3 cups of chicken broth until it comes about halfway up the sides of the meat. Last, I'll add some very traditional herbs that I just picked out of my garden, some parsley, some thyme, and a couple of bay leaves. I put these on top so that I can remove them at the end. Next, put the top on. I'll put this in a 350-degree oven for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And then we'll come back and take a look at the finished product. Okay, here we are again. We've waited just 2 hours for this to cook in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven. So now we're ready to pull off the lid and see what we've got. There it is. Smells and looks beautiful. And here's what the finished product looks like. You can see we've got a nice gravy. Our cipollini onions are braised, and the other vegetables are ready to eat. All we have to do is to push the bay leaf aside. This is the bay leaf. Push it aside because we don't want that to be in anyone's dish. Now I like to serve Osso Bucco in a bowl, and I like to serve it with mashed potatoes. So let's just take a scoop of mashed potatoes, put it in our bowl, and then we'll grab a wonderful piece of Osso Bucco here, put it to the side, and then bring out some of these great vegetables. We've got the carrot. It's very colorful. Make sure each person gets a nice cipollini onion, and then we can take some of this gravy that is manufactured itself and put it right over the potatoes. And then don't forget, if you have a little spill like that or a little slop, take a little piece of paper towel and wipe off the rim. And there you've got a beautiful one-dish meal. Thanks for joining me in the Flavor Secrets Kitchen today. You can find the recipe at the end of this program or also on the flavorsecrets.com website. Bon appetit and enjoy. Here's a Flavor Secret quick technique for you. Today I'm going to show you how a professional chef chops an onion. I'm going to do it slowly today so that you can see the steps, but as you practice this, you'll be able to do it faster and faster. This will work for a white onion, a yellow onion, or even a shallot. Just note, in the case of a shallot, that there are two bulbs inside, so you need to separate the bulbs first. Peel back a little bit of this and you can see there are two bulbs inside. And then chop each one as I show you how to chop the yellow onion. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is just take off the end and hold your knife down, and you'll see that part of this brown paper then will stick to the knife and come off with it. Do the same thing on the other side. Just slice off the end of it, hold it down, and slice that off. And that will help you peel off the papery part of the end of the onion very easily. Now, make sure you take off this papery part because it isn't really edible. And I know that sounds funny, but I actually did hand an onion to someone recently who didn't know that. So let's start from the very beginning here. All right, now we want to slice down through the top of the onion like this, and then lay the onion flat. I'll show you on half an onion here. Notice how the onion has a curved shape to it, and it has these lines that you can follow with your knife. So you want to kind of stay with the shape of the onion and just cut along these lines. They don't have to be exactly along the lines, but they should be pretty close. And notice how I'm not cutting through the root end of the onion. That holds it together. So now I'm going to cut down, just sort of curving around as I go. Now the next thing I'll do is slice through the onion this way. Be careful not to hit your fingers. So it's a good idea to get your fingers kind of up on top of the onion as you do this one. If you want large dice, just cut through the middle of the onion like that. If you want small dice, cut through twice. So I'm just going to cut through once, and again, I'm not going all the way through. I'm going to stop just before I get to the end so that that holds the onion all together. Now all I have to do is come down this way, and it falls immediately into dice. When you get to the end of it, just turn it over flat and chop these off the end. And there you go, there you have it. Instant dice. This is your flavor secret technique for today. Thanks for joining us.